Today on the Hobby Bench, I'll be talking about Chaos at Kasserine, a campaign for Battleground HD. Now, I've talked about a skirmish rule set I really like, Battleground HD, before, and they've come out with a new campaign for it, Chaos at Kasserine. It's a campaign revolving around the Tunisia campaign in 1943, and of course the Battle for Kasserine Pass. Now, the forces in the book are described being the Desert Africa Corps and the U.S. Army, primarily facing off with each other. Interestingly, it focuses on the initial days and the reconnaissance efforts for both the Allies and the Axis. And for Battleground HD, I think this really sort of makes sense. The rules depict the action down for each man and really seems to shine in smaller squad engagements. So focusing on reconnaissance allows players to explore the opening days of this conflict as opposed to maybe a larger view focused only on the Battle for Kasserine Pass. Now, this campaign, it goes through 8 turns where players allocate both command points and force points to represent the action and the number of units they can direct on the campaign map. Now, there are different phases opening with recon, trying to get intelligence on routes that are open to your troops, certain occupied areas, and maybe how heavily those areas are defended. Then command points are basically allocated, and they modify a die roll to determine the level of information a commander can get on map areas. Now, this is followed by a movement phase where groups are moved through the use of command points. Finally, you get battles where you have 2 opposing units in the same areas on a map, with the strength of those units dictated by force points. Now, this time you should really shift over to the tabletop and actually play out a specific scenario, and they'll have an attacker and a defender. The defender of an area, they have an option to fight a delaying in battle instead. So basically, they just choose a different scenario with a penalty on the size of their force. However, the outcome can allow the defender to move and retain most of their forces. So if you sort of muck up your recon a little bit and you're facing a much larger force, this allows the defender to switch up the assigned scenario and avoid facing an overwhelming attacker. They have some agency in that. Now, battles can be extracted out if you want. And there's a quick battle option. Basically, players allocate force points with modifiers going to the higher roll winning. So at the end of 8 campaign turns, the player that controls 6 key locations is the winner. Now, during the initial turns, the Germans have both force and command point advantage, but this sort of shifts with the U.S. Army having an advantage during the later turns of the campaign. The monkey wrench of all this is the campaign event cards. They can throw in a complication towards your opponent, or potentially give you a temporary advantage. And these are distributed through the use of QR codes that you can access during the game. When I talk about forces, they're allocated using a point buy system. And the book requires you to have additional force packs for the campaign. When allocating points to both a force or scenario, players can purchase heroes. Now, these are stalwart figures that have both scenario and campaign effects when they're used. These actual heroes, though, are basically fictitious individuals, so they're sort of based on a bunch of different officers that might be very particular for a certain type of force or a certain type of unit. Now, what's cool is you have a variety of desert terrain features. It's quite nice and really gives you a bunch of ideas to sort of fill out a desert table. There are a few additional rules, and most of the extensive being for night fighting. What I really appreciate is the developers offering 2 different options. One's a really detailed system, sort of depicts muzzle flashes from different types of weapons, sort of being incorporated into modifiers you roll off and skill checks to sort of see how you can maintain a hidden status. But there is a more streamlined, simplistic set of rules that you can use if you want instead. And so I like you having that option. There are rules for mines, and there's also a rule for wire. So all this then is followed up by 8 different scenarios. And basically, it's information specific in these scenarios, both for the attacker and for the defender. And there's a good variety, I think, of location and different board setups. The scenarios are also interesting too. Like a lot of them have varying conditions. Quite a few are based on maintaining control of certain areas, or fighting delaying battles, or displacing units off the edge of a table. And some maybe even involve destroying particular objectives like blowing up ammo and fuel dumps. The designers also offer some suggestions for fielding a typical platoon for each type of scenario. And that's sort of a nice touch. So if you're really not too sure about what you want to use, at least they can give you some options. Hey, this would be like a typical reconnaissance platoon that you could use. The scenarios also employ QR codes that determine additional objectives or resolve random scenario rules, like the entry of reinforcements or maybe outcome of blowing up an ammo dump. It's a cool idea, and I've lauded Battleground for having QR codes in the rulebook because I think it's a clever way of sort of demonstrating the rules and providing some examples. You can look through a rule set, and then if you want to get some more information, you can scan a QR code, it links to a video, and you can get a short breakdown and explanation of that rule. And I really like the way that works. But I understand the designers wanted to try to keep the page count down and try to keep some of the information hidden until you actually play. But I think in practice, using these QR codes can be a little clunky. In some cases, certain codes don't seem to work. You can have issues accessing a website. Essentially, you need a cell phone to play. And even in more dire, I think maybe in 10, 15 years, who knows if the companies can be maintaining web pages that link to these QR codes. So I can understand the draw of maybe using this, but I don't know. I sort of prefer to have something that's a little bit more future-proof. But I understand there will be a separate PDF that's coming out. It has all the random scenario rules and the campaign event deck. And so I really applaud the developers for being willing to accommodate basically Luddite players like me wanting to go with print version of the rules and cards. The book itself is rounded out with some units that are specific to the campaign, but I still say though, you need additional force packs to play this campaign. Something that isn't provided really in the description of the campaign book. So keep that in mind. When you buy this, you also need to have the appropriate force packs that you can download from the website. However, like I mentioned, overall, I'm pretty impressed. It seems like the developers spent a fair amount of time researching this conflict, provided some interesting scenarios that fit well within the Africa campaign. And these scenarios can be played independently of the overall campaign itself. And that's something I'll probably try doing. I haven't noodled through the campaign much, but I like the idea of focusing on smaller reconnaissance action. It's a great direction for the book. For a skirmish rule set, it really leans into these type of fights, and it works with these type of rules, instead of trying to maybe mimic large company plus size battles. It's got nice art, the layout of the book is solid. I think it would be great for folks wanting to play early or mid-war Africa campaign rules. And while you don't have force packs maybe available for the British, for example, there is an early war European theater force pack that's out there. And if you can also find in those vehicle sheets for Matildas, Bren carriers, and Dingo scout cars, plus early war AT guns, really I think with some creativity you can work up your own appropriate force to play these scenarios using British. Plus there's mid-war Italians that are covered in another campaign book. So I think there's some stuff out there that can work with this rule set if you just don't want to focus on maybe just Germans and US troops. But I'm hoping that there's more appropriate force lists for all the nations that are involved in the African theater, and they come out soon. I think these would work well with the existing campaign book, as it seems the scenarios are pretty modular. Overall, I think it's a nice campaign. Can't wait to try some scenarios out on the tabletop.